Crossfire, a World War II simulation without measuring distances or even counting turns. Most wargames revolves around three things that are present in virtually every title: measuring distances, rolling dice, and alternating players along clearly predetermined turns. In World War II game Crossfire, only the dice rolling applies. It might sound novel and initiative, but, well, now comes the second bombshell. The game was released back in 1996, so this innovative approach is from the last century. The creator of the rules, Arty Conliffe, thought it was more important to play by feel using logical historical approaches than using artificial boundaries that don't match the reality. A soldier running from cover to cover isn't going to stop an inch from a trench because his movement just failed, and the enemy machine gunner isn't going to just watch and wait his turn to open fire either. Now, sure, someone has thought that this can possibly work because it must either be complete anarchy gameplay, why is or the game is completely drowned in the rules to compensate for lack of rounds and gauges. And strangely, neither is true. Crossfire still has clear understanding of how activation works, and strangely enough, it's not well drawing in rules, and it's the kind of game that's fine to play after reading the rules with just a reference sheet. In practice, players take turns holding the initiative. Whoever has the initiative can do whatever they want in any order, so you can move troops, shoot them, call in artillery, raise them for morale, anything. You can take it as far and wide as you like. That's a catch through. Once you mess up an action or get interrupted by enemy successful shooting, the initiative passes to your opponent. These are small things, but it's really switch one thoughts process when playing. You're not thinking in terms, this round I'm going to get to the corner of the building, next round I'm going to sacrifice shooting to run across the road with the unit, and it's great that the move works out by inch so that even for one activation I get into the building so my opponent won't shoot at me at all this turn. But in Crossfire, instead you do addressing the fact that I need to get this squad across the fucking unprotected road, but it's still guarded by enemy machine gunner who I just can't get to engage, and the mortar can see it. Well, what the hell am I supposed to do about it now? Basic unity Crossfire is infantry squad with machine gun, so something like 6 to 15 soldiers depending on nationality or period of the war, represented on a smaller scale by single base with figures. These squads in theory can act independently, but under supervision of lieutenant, but in practice they are activated as part of entire platoon, which is true cornerstone of Crossfire. For comparison, in previously reviewed ball action, I will put link in the description. For example, platoon is practically the entire army. Now it's basically the basic unit for activation. The platoons are then grouped together under a company, which doesn't play role as activations anymore, but its commander still give morale bonus to his platoons, and the company also allocates any support weapons like heavy machine guns or artillery. And if you have enough soldiers to play with, the companies are further grouped into battalion, which is the final station in Crossfire, and battalion is the highest organization structure you have. So there is about 100 to easily 1,000 soldiers on the table. So the game is therefore more in concept for smaller scales than is 28mm, such as 6mm or 15mm, and is also very popular in both 20mm and there are some guys playing it in 28mm still. Since there is no fixed measuring of distances, the game works regardless of the size of the figures because it doesn't really matter for the game. But some players have taken the game down in the organization level, basically for 28mm, and then the basic unit is not infantry squad but the fire team of 3 soldiers, which are only grouped into infantry squad with machine gun commanded by sergeant instead of lieutenant. The game works exactly identically, just the commander activates squad instead of platoon, and the experience is very similar to playing like bolt action or chain of command in the game size, not by the real experience of playing. Even the shooting and dice throwing itself is, well, very minimalistic. It's not a handful of dice, as one is used in most of the skirmish games, or basically in Warhammer 40k. Some armies take, well, basically up to extreme, where, for example, one shot is scored with something like 50 dice. just well normal in Warhammer 40k with some units. In Crossfire, machine guns fire 4 dice. The game uses classic d6, and everything else uses 3 dice, except of course for artillery, mortars, and stuff like that. This how simple is it? To hit, you have a roll 5 or 6 on the dice, and one hit makes a pin. The opponent squad stop in place. 2 hits suppress. The squad can shoot in addition to not moving, and eventually the third hit finally kills the squad and takes out of the game. The cover takes 1 die in the shooting, and if you don't want to lose initiative, or you just want to steal it from your opponent, you must at least suppress the enemy squad while shooting. Simple math will tell you that the chances of one infantry squad using 2 dice to shoot opponent in the buildings are not very great. This is where command and control mechanics kicks in, where commanders not only add morale bonus to soldiers, but also allow them to combine joint fire, thus eliminating the chances of missing and consequent loss of initiative, but also the ability to attack heavy machine guns to fire. But this is where the organization difficulties come in, because that commander has to control both of his soldiers and have view of the target, as well as having a machine gun nearby. So it's not as much as fun as might seem to move troops in front of Dagin enemy who is firing back. The other interesting thing about shooting is that all weapons have unlimited range, so in theory, you can shoot from one end of the table to the other. This works in practice too and makes the game very, very terrain intensive and therefore slightly limiting for potential newcomers to the hobby, as you really need a table full of terrain to block a view. This prevents these comical situations where the rifle doesn't go from one end of the warehouse to the other because it's only shoot 24 inches, and this particular building has 25 inches diameter. Therefore, the most useful weapon in the game is not tanks or machine guns, but well, stealthy mortar or artillery guy that can bring up smoke screen onto the right spot to block the view from the enemy shooters. But let's not just talk about the positives, because there are also some negatives. One of them is the fact that Crossfire has objectively really simplistic, shallow rules for tanks, which are really unsatisfying compared to the rest of the game. Tanks have stats for cannon strength and armor, and when they fire they roll 1 die to hit, and when they hit they roll 2nd die for penetration, which is versus the tank's armor affected by the cannon's penetration bonus. And when you roll over the armor, boom, tank explodes, done, that's it. I mean, tanks explodes incredibly, and deploying them is all about chance if your opponent can roll that 4 plus twice in a row. The developers explain this, as with for ball action example, that they are saying that things are just an add-on for variety, but the core game is about infantry, which is up to everyone whether or not they accept this explanation. People are equally divided on the genericness or lack of national rules on differences in weapons. An infantry squad shoots using 3 dice, and it doesn't matter if they are British with Bran or Germans with MG42 or Americans completely equipped with semi-automatic rifles. They have the same rules for shooting, and in general, special rules for nationalities are really scarce. Japanese or Russians ignore pins when running at close range. Germans have better NCOs who can command squad with a lieutenant, etc. This design intent was justified by the fact that unlike skirmish games with few dozen soldiers, where there is difference whenever MG42 or Bran is shooting out of the window, in Crossfire, when you command a company or even complete battalion, it's relatively unimportant whether a particular weapon has slightly higher cadence than the opponent's weapon, because at this scale of combat, these details are irrelevant, and it's more important to deal with the movement of larger formations than whenever the German machine gun has or doesn't have extra die. Of course, the advantage of this approach is that the rules can be applied without the slightest problem to basically any other 20th century conflict, and people often play Crossfire for World War I. I personally tried playing a wargame from decolonization of Africa in Crossfire, and the game worked just as well did in World War II, without having to introduce any of the house rules, because infantry squad with automatic weapons roll 3 dice like opponent's squad with automatic weapons, and it doesn't matter if they have bolt action rifles in the original rules, because it's really unimportant for the game scale. The rulebook itself is not exempt from criticism, and the ravages of time are really showing. Forget modern rulebook full of colorful pictures, diagram, explanatory tables, and highlights. Crossfire is an old school rulebook that looks more like a script or technical manual than a friendly book that invites you to read it. But it also makes them clearly written like, manual, with no digression and clear structured technical English. But oddly enough, it reads, really well once you get over the initial aversion to the visuals. To me, it's absolutely incredible that even almost 30 years after its release, Crossfire has a vibrant and large online community that even some modern popular games might envy, and which is still creating new scenarios, fun expansions, balancing fun facts, and stuff like that. This also says a lot about its undeniable qualities when it's happening 30 years ago or after release. But even after all these years, Crossfire is still an interesting game that still has lots of offer today, but there is a bit of a problem with who to actually recommend it today. Because in theory, it's a game that is suitable for all players, but at the same time, it's definitely not for everyone. It can be difficult for newcomers to grasp lots of abstract concepts and wargaming basics that rules, kind of ignore, knowing that everyone probably knows them. Instead of introductory explanation of this is how model move and this is how dice are eventually rolled, that is included in the first pages of most rules nowadays, for the sake of newcomers to the hobby, Crossfire just pours the rules for various mechanics. For newcomers, it's also limiting that the game is relatively model intensive, especially for the terrain, which you really need a lot of because the unlimited range mechanics. For experienced players, it can be problem to get into the game at all the through the rules themselves, because nowadays when somebody is used to beautiful and colorful rulebooks, it takes a bit of persuasion to start reading black and white block of text. Moreover, the rules breaks already rooted learned practices that everything has maximum range and movements, and it takes effort to switch from this mindset. I admit that even I had myself forced to read a little bit, and the only thing that helped me to do was the online community of the game, which is still playing it years later and praising it on the internet. And I was wondering what everyone still sees in it and if it's really worth it. But once you get that, Crossfire offers a fresh gaming experience full of interesting moments that has incredible tactical deep with platformers, special rules, and without throwing bunch of dice. That's what the game excels at, and even after all these years, the players doesn't feel like they are playing Rule X war game, but they are really playing World War II, where the rules just are add-on how to do it. So get to do some verdict. I think Crossfire provides an absolutely amazing gaming experience where, as players, you are not sensually playing the game according to some artificial mechanics, but rather you are actually commanding soldiers on the battlefield, where the game rules serve as an aid to evaluate rather than backbone of the game. The game still feels gameplay wise fresh and innovative, even these days, which is really remarkable for the rules that are more than a quarter of century old. This was Spot on Wars, and if you enjoy it, don't forget to like, subscribe for more, or just leave me something in the comments. Bye, guys.